what we're doing in Prometheus is we introduced this new technology that allows you to make fuel out of thin air, right? From carbon comes from the air itself. We're targeting getting down to like $2 a gallon. We are ready to go. We're going to start production, and we're doing demos now. So we're making enough fuel to put into motorcycles, put into our Mustang, and put into racing cars.
Hi, everybody. This is Horsepower Heritage. I'm Maurice Merrick. Thanks for joining me once again, and today we're talking about one of the most important resources we all need to enjoy our cars, the fuel in your tank. And my guest today may well have found the key to cheap and plentiful fuel. And that has the potential to extend the dominance of the internal combustion engine far into the future. Rob McGinnis is the founder and chief executive officer of Prometheus Fuels. Through a process called direct air capture, Prometheus is producing synthetic hydrocarbon fuels right out of the atmosphere. And this isn't just theoretical, they're doing it today. And if you've been watching the demonization of internal combustion power and government mandates for electric vehicles, and in some cases even full-on bans of ICE engines, in some places, particularly in European city centers, you've probably wondered how much longer you'll be able to continue to drive your pride and joy. But Prometheus says their process is a net zero carbon option, meaning it won't add any atmospheric carbon, but instead basically recycle what's already there. And at scale, the price per gallon will be dollars less than you pay at the pump right now. So this should be exciting news for all of us, right? Before we get started, don't forget to rate and review Horsepower Heritage on your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends. And if you want to support the show, go to buymeacoffee.com/HP Heritage and become a patron. And thank you to those of you who've already done that. One more note, I also want to thank the gang over at bringatrailer.com for inviting me to be a guest on the Bring a Trailer podcast last week. I flew up to San Francisco to sit down in person with host Alex Porter, and we talked about our car interests and podcasting, and we also played a fun little game called One Make, One Decade, where we each picked our favorite Chevrolets from the 1960s from 5 categories: sports car, truck 4x4, family hauler, daily driver, and also a wild card. So that was great fun, and it's available now if you want to check it out. I'll put a link in the show notes. All right, here comes that bumper music, so let's get to it, guys. Here's my conversation with Rob McGinnis right here on Horsepower Heritage. Enjoy. Rob, I am very excited about today because I've been doing my research on Prometheus Fuels, your company, and it's got so much promise for us car guys. And by the way, you're a car guy, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, I come to cars through fuel. I love cars. I didn't grow up with a wrench in my hand like some guys did, but I aspire to be in the car guy community.
All right, let's do this. So Prometheus Fuels, the idea is fuel from the air around us.
Yeah, that's right.
It sounds like science fiction, right? But I mean, we're living in an age where the seemingly impossible is becoming daily reality all the time.
Yeah, amazing technological advances happening right now, for sure. And ours is one of them.
And so when I say fuel from the air around us, it sounds like magic. Really, this is what we would call an electrofuel, right?
Yeah, because the energy in it comes from electricity, from like solar or wind.
Right. And contrasting with something else we hear a lot about nowadays, which is biofuels.
Yeah, that comes from plants, right? So different than that.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to just differentiate that right at the outset, because I know there's been a lot of capital investment in biofuels, and that's kind of been, I don't want to use the word panacea, but that's sort of been one of the answers to the questions we've all been asking about things like sustainability and things like, where do we go from the internal combustion engine?
I still like the internal combustion engine.
I do too.
I think keep it.
I totally agree with you. And I have to say right now, I mean, personal opinion, but, you know, EVs are not one size fits all. They're not the answer to everything. They have their place, right? In the city, dense urban areas for short trips. But they don't answer all of the questions. There are other markets that we need to consider, like aviation and transoceanic shipping and rail and over-the-road trucking. And so one of the things I hope to do today is to sort of differentiate fuels and power plants and where Prometheus fits in with all that, because actually you guys what you're trying is going to be quite versatile.
Yeah, that's right.
So electric transportation for everything is unrealistic, right? Because hydrocarbons have so many advantages. Hydrocarbons are the most energy dense substance,
That's right.
That we can use. It's easily distributed, it's easily transported, and ICE engines are cleaner than ever, right? Tailpipe emissions are cleaner than ever. And the efficiency has gone up. There's a limitation, right, to the efficiency of a mechanical power plant, of course.
Sure.
So where did this idea come from?
So the idea that you could make synthetic fuels is an old one. Over 100 years ago, people were turning like wood chips and like coal and things like that into liquid fuels. But the idea that you could actually use CO2 from the air to make your fuel, so it'd be carbon neutral, and for it to be also inexpensive is very new, right? So CO2 from the air to fuel is something people have been able to do for a long time, but they require you to spend 3 or 4 times as much for the fuel. And so what I did and what we're doing in Prometheus is we introduced this new technology that allows you to make fuel out of thin air, right? From carbon comes from the air itself at the same price as fossil fuel. And that's what's so transformative. So we make fuel every day now at our shop in Santa Cruz, California, in our parking lot from solar panels and from just a cooling tower that captures CO2 from the air. So we did literally like print fuel for ourselves every day with this new technology.
Printing fuel. Fuel. That's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, that's one way people think about it. It's kind of like, you're assembling the parts like little Lego blocks, right? You're taking the carbon and you're taking hydrogen from water and you're taking electrons from whatever source, like solar panels we have, and you're gluing them all together and you make this liquid fuel, and you make with the kind of liquid fuel you want. And then it has very high energy density, right? It's really easy to store it in a can. It's really easy to transport it. You just drive it in the back of a truck. It'll stay that way for decades, right? It doesn't drain like a battery does. And you can use it in the car you've already got or the truck you've already got. And I think that one of the things people don't think a lot about is just how long you can keep a great car or truck on the road, right? If you're willing to maintain it, take really good care of it, you replace parts as they wear out. That is a very, very inexpensive and beloved way to get around, right? And to do your job. And so you change the fuel, and what's wrong with that? Right now, you're carbon neutral, if that's the thing you care about the most. But also, we're going to drive the price of the fuel down. We want to actually put downward pressure on price for fuel with this new technology. We're not asking people to pay more for it. So not only do you get to keep your internal combustion engine, you get to keep your car, your truck that you love, your motorcycle. You can also go to the racetrack, right? And of course, yes, you can also travel on a plane. You can have your goods shipped by a ship or by a long haul truck. Like all those things are things liquid fuels do. But we want to do them by making them in a new way.
By the way, I was talking to a really good friend of mine this morning, and he was asking me what I was up to today. And I said, well, I'm interviewing the CEO of Prometheus Fuels. And he says, man, I know about that company. That's so cool. He was really hopeful that you're going to be successful in the marketplace. And, he's a big hot rodder. He's got lots of old cars. So it is exciting. And also, when you consider the cost to the individual of replacing their current vehicle,
very expensive.
It's very expensive. I mean, Rob, I have a 93-year-old car sitting in my garage.
Awesome.
And I mean, there's no way I would make it an EV. I want to continue using that car the rest of my life. So very, very interesting. Now, I think people have to bear with me for a second here, okay? Because we can't really have an informed discussion about this and an understanding with my listeners unless we sort of delve into some basic chemistry, okay? So this is kind of high school level chemistry. I just want to go over a few things. Please contribute to this portion, but everybody stick with me for a second, okay? So Let's go first to the atom. The atom is the smallest unit of an element that still retains the properties of that element, right? So an atom has subatomic particles in it, a nucleus or center, which is composed of protons and neutrons. Protons are positive charge, neutrons are neutral. And then that nucleus is surrounded by an electron shell, which is a negative charge, right? So already we're into electricity. And that electron shell, there could be one electron orbiting the nucleus, or there could be many. So that's the atom. That's the basic building block of all matter, is it not?
It is. Yeah, that's right. You combine them in different ways to make different things.
Right. Okay, so from that, we go to the molecule, which is at least two atoms or more, and they're bonded. They have an electrochemical bond that forms a compound. Okay, next, let's talk about hydrogen, because hydrogen is integral to what you're doing, right? So hydrogen is the first element on the periodic chart. It's number one. It's got one proton, no neutrons, and only one electron orbiting the nucleus. So it's a very simple atomic structure.
Right. It tends to be an H2 as a gas, right? That's the molecule.
H2, yeah, because it binds two hydrogen atoms bind together and become H2. So in the environment, that's how we find it.
That's right.
Okay, so hydrogen. Now we've talked about hydrogen. Now let's move on to carbon. Everybody hears carbon. Carbon is a pollutant, right? Well, carbon happens to be number 6 on the periodic table, and almost 99% of the carbon on Earth is actually carbon-12, which the 12 refers to its atomic structure. It's stable carbon, which is in contrast to carbon-14. We hear about carbon-14 dating.
That's right.
That has a radioactive decay, right? It's got a half-life.
Mm-hmm.
It's not stable like carbon-12. But so carbon in our environment, it's mostly carbon-12, right?
Mostly carbon-12, some carbon-13, and then carbon-14. And it's actually really interesting that people can actually fingerprint different kinds of fuel using those measurements.
Now let's talk about hydrogen gas, because it's, like you said, it's actually two atoms bonded as a molecule. It's lighter than air. It's highly combustible because it combines with oxygen so well, right? And now we've got to move on to what is known as a covalent bond. And that's when two atoms or more share pairs of electrons and it forms compounds. And so when we talk about carbon chains, we're really talking about covalent bonds of carbon, right?
Yeah, it's carbons who are sharing electrons with one another.
Right. So because they share electrons and they form these long chains, we have all sorts of hydrocarbons, hydrogen and carbon together. So it could be methane, it could be heptane, it could be octane. They're all hydrocarbon chains, right?
That's right.
Okay, so hopefully everyone is still with us. I just had to get that out of the way because we talk about petroleum and hydrocarbon fuels, and I want people to understand really what that is on the most basic level, because you are producing multiple forms of hydrocarbon fuel.
Yeah, we do.
Okay, what is the genesis of this for you? What was your training that allowed you to see this as a potential for the marketplace?
Well, I mean, my Twitter handle is I make sci-fi real. So my kind of passion in engineering, I'm an engineer, is to do things that seem really fantastical and really amazing if you could just figure out how to do it. And then I just bang my head against it for however long it takes to figure it out. And I just knew that it was possible to make this fuel this new way. And I had been thinking about it for years and years and years. And I finally felt like I had all the pieces I needed to do it. And I started a company to go ahead and prove that out. And we've been doing it for about 6 years now. I went from concept all the way up to full-size commercial prototype. So that means everything is full size. It's kind of like having a full-size engine on a dyno, right? And the next step is to put it into containers and take it out to the field. So put the engine in the car kind of thing. And so the way I came to it was, I studied engineering. and I actually studied like chemical and environmental engineering. So I was definitely thinking about how to put those carbon and hydrogen molecules together. Um, but the kind of the way I describe it is in terms of combustion. So everyone here knows you put fuel in your car, it goes in the engine. Let's just use gasoline. Gasoline has hundreds of different molecules in it, different combinations of carbon and hydrogen. But it all kind of mixes together into an amber liquid. And what you do is you put it into your engine with an injector or a carburetor, you mix in air, and you get essentially a flame inside that piston chamber. And what comes out is CO2 and water vapor and power, right? You get energy out. You stop at the gas, that burns that fuel faster, brings in more air, and you have that chemical reaction and you get the energy. So what we're doing is reverse combustion. So essentially, we grab that water vapor and we grab that CO2 from the air, and we take some kind of energy, like from a solar panel, and we recombine them using electrochemistry and turn them back into the fuel again. And so then you can just use that fuel again and again and again, because the CO2 that you emit to the air, we capture that and make more fuel. And as long as you have a source of power like a solar panel, you can just keep making fuel indefinitely, and you're never going to be adding extra CO2 to the air from the ground like you would with like a fossil fuel or something like that. And the first product we're going to make is methanol. And the reason we're making methanol first is because people can use it for racing. People can use it for ships that bring goods across the ocean. And you can turn it really easily into gasoline and diesel and jet fuel that are the same price and have the same characteristics as what people are already using. So it's a good kind of general purpose first liquid fuel. But yeah, what we do is we capture CO2 in a cooling tower kind of thing. We have electrons from the solar. We have an electrochemical stack, and we combine them in what we call reverse combustion to have this liquid methanol. 100% of what we make right now is methanol, and we use it in our own vehicles. We actually had a Honda Grom modified to run on race methanol.
Nice.
Yeah, stunt driver come out is awesome. And then also we, this is actually debuting this. Nobody knows this, but that the Mustang on our website, we actually have that car. So we have a 1968 Mustang Fastback, and it's the only classic Mustang that we know of in the world that's modified to run dual fuel on both gasoline and racing methanol. And I was driving it yesterday on our fuel, and it's amazing.
That's fantastic. Classic car guys are always concerned about the combustion properties of alternative fuels, particularly alcohol in fuel, because the cooling properties of alcohol fuels are a little bit different. They can react with some of the castings in classic cars, like in carburetors and stuff.
Sure.
Is that something that you've considered or been able to address?
Yeah, definitely. So we're going to make a classic gasoline and offer that has no alcohols in it. And so this would be, we'll say molecularly identical to the gasoline used now, but cleaner, right? So less junk in it. It didn't come out of the ground. We made it from air. It's purely synthetic. And so it's superior in a lot of ways. But you could put it into your classic car. You could put it into a modern car. We're going to make different grades that have higher octane and whatnot. It's burn clean. But starting out, we're making this racing methanol. And so people like methanol for racing because it creates really high octane. You can get really high compression ratios. It does cool the engine, so that allows you to supercharge it or turbocharge with less intercooling. You can just get a lot more power. And in fact, the Mustang has about 60 horsepower more at the wheel than it did on gasoline, just by changing the fuel. Yeah, it's powerful.
That's pretty awesome. I mean, I think it was Texaco that used to say, "Put a tiger in your tank," but
that's it.
yeah. Sounds like you're putting a dragon in the tank.
It can really get power, especially if you really take advantage of it. We put in very modest changes, a couple $1,000s in parts, and you get like a really great performance out of it. And we can switch between a methanol or a racing methanol or a conventional gasoline in that car.
Very cool.
But what we're saying is that the gasoline we make, you're not going to have to modify your engine. You don't have to worry about that. We know the difference, and we'll offer the right gasoline for people.
Terrific. Now, one of the things that sort of got you down this pathway was you were working in the desalination industry. Is that right?
Yeah, my first startup company, I developed a new way to get fresh water from salty water, desalination. And I was kind of obsessed with it. I was in the Navy before I went to college. I was in enlisted Navy, and it was what's called explosive ordnance disposal. So we were disarming mines in the Persian Gulf, and I would see these big desalination plants on the coast, and we'd be talking about like, what is that? What do they do? And like, you pour oil on one side and you get water out of the other. And And I was like, well, that's absurd. I could do better than that. And they're like, okay, sure. And when I got out and went to college, I used GI Bill. And sure enough, I came up with a way to cut the energy and the cost by half of desalinating water. And I started a company to do it. And it was pretty successful, and I really liked the experience of starting a company. And so I started another one and I started another one. This is my third one.
And the reason I mentioned the desalination is there's part of what's making Prometheus possible is something called a Maxwell core, right?
Yeah.
Well, before we tell people what the Maxwell core is, where did that name come from?
So there's a guy who invented a famous set of equations called the Maxwell, right? The unified electricity and magnetism. And, people like Einstein were like a huge fan of this guy, right? So, and he had this thought experiment that at least was named after him of this Maxwell's demon. Right? And Maxwell's demon would sit there at this little gate in between like two reservoirs. They're the same temperature. And he would wait for a hot molecule to come by. He'd open the gate, the hot molecule, and he'd close the gate and keep the cold molecules from going. And what ended up happening over time is that when Maxwell's demon is opening and closing this gate, that you have a hot reservoir and a cold reservoir. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Now you got an engine. You could turn that into energy. How did that happen? And it was a thought experiment about the role of information in thermodynamics. And it was, I don't know, as an engineer, I thought it was a really cool story. And I made a membrane that has very, very specific selectivity for molecules, like single file molecules go through this membrane. And so I thought about this little demon opening the gates at the front. And so we called it the Maxwell core.
Okay, interesting. So kind of a little homage to Maxwell.
Yeah, that's right.
Your process involves chemistry and catalyzation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Solar energy, electrolysis. You're not splitting atoms here, but I got to believe that this process requires a certain a substantial amount of energy to accomplish, or is that not true?
It's like you said, every engine has losses. Just having a conversation today about how much you lose from the engine to the wheel, right, in any transmission. And the same thing is true when you do reverse combustion. So we can get about, if you're trying to optimize for efficiency, you can get about 50, 60% efficiency out of doing it. If you're trying to optimize for the cost of the fuel, then it's really better to be like 35 to 40% efficient. So those are kind of different dials you can turn. But the basic idea is that solar is getting so cheap now, right? The cheapest solar in the world is less than 1 cent per kilowatt hour now for like the last 5 years. And so when solar gets that cheap, then efficiency becomes a little less important, right? Because it's really more about the capital equipment that you have to use, right? If the input cost is super, super low, then it's really more about like, how do I take this stainless steel part and make it into a plastic part, that is just as durable and just as good? Or how do I just use fewer parts or reduce the complexity of my system? So but yeah, roughly speaking, half of the energy from the solar panel will turn into the liquid fuel. But that's really pretty good. And then we can get to a cost. My goal is to get to gasoline at like approaching $2 a gallon using this process. You have to choose the year because of inflation, but let's say today's dollars.
Right. And the solar, I don't want to call it free energy because you have infrastructure that you have to pay for and maintain.
Right.
But it's a relatively low cost once the infrastructure is in place. Yeah.
Yeah. So the solar panels we bought for our shop, they're for demonstration purposes. So, the cost of making an extra gallon of fuel for us is like almost nothing because we already bought the solar panel. So if you do a big project, you have to get a loan for the solar panels. You pay for it over time and you kind of divide that by what you make, but it's still very, very cheap these days. Like the cost of solar panels and solar electricity have dropped so much. That was the reason I started the company when I did, because in 2008 and 19, when I started the company, was the first time that solar electricity got less than 2 cents per kilowatt hour in the world. I thought, well, that's cheap enough to make liquid fuel.
That was kind of your trigger point financially, economically.
Yeah, because I knew I could do it technically. Like I had it all figured out, I felt. But you had to make sure that you have the right timing. Timing is really important in entrepreneurship. If you start too early or too late, it could be really a problem. And the massive signal was that drop in price, the fact that it got so cheap. And it's dropping even further. What I love about doing this is that as the price of solar gets lower and lower and lower and lower, the cost of this fuel gets lower and lower and lower. So it's never free. Like people used to, I guess in the 60s and 70s, talked about like nuclear so free it was going to be cheap, and impossible to meter or whatever. That almost never works out quite that way. But we're talking about going lower and lower and lower because the input price just goes down over time. The other thing I'm saying, this is kind of like in the weeds of like, building a project. But if you buy those solar panels, like they're paid for, right? So they don't go up over time. But if you're trying to make fossil fuel, you got to go find a new well, drill it, and all that. All that stuff has inflation on it. And so as the price of like conventional fossil fuels are going up over time with inflation, like the thing you built is flat and going down because of depreciation. So it's like some details on the finance side that just make it cheaper than fossil fuel and have a lot of like really strong advantages over it.
Right. Okay, so we kind of blew by the Maxwell core just a little bit.
Sure.
I got hung up on the name, but what is the Maxwell core?
So the Maxwell core is a membrane I created in my second company. So after my first company, I worked in this desalination process, which was called forward osmosis. And I had created a membrane in that company for that purpose, like a forward osmosis membrane. And I wanted to create another membrane because it was just hard, because I thought it was sci-fi that should be real. And the kind of membrane I wanted to make was called a carbon nanotube membrane. So this is a membrane where every single pore in the membrane is a carbon nanotube. If you don't know what a carbon nanotube is, it's like a straw that's like 1 nanometer in diameter or less. So imagine taking a bundle of straws, right, and surrounding them with like a plastic or something. So everything that goes through the membrane has to go through the insides of the straws. But the straws are so narrow that you have like one molecule of fuel at a time. Like that's the thing I wanted to figure out how to make, and no one had ever figured out how to make that like in a practical way. Once again, practical is very important, right? Because like when Henry Ford made the Model T, there had been cars around for a long time, right? But he made it practical. When Thomas Edison made the light bulb, there had been light bulbs around for a long time, but he made the one that was practical. So I was like, I want to make the first practical carbon nanotube membrane, and I did. I succeeded at doing it. And one of the fantastic properties of this membrane is that it can separate alcohols from water. So this is something that people have been publishing on in academic labs, that showing that they could do this, but they were making them like the size of like a little tiny like dime or something. And so I actually made them into commercial modules. And what it allows us to do is when you're taking CO2 from the air and you're turning it into fuels in water, a lot of the times the product you're making is an alcohol, like an ethanol or methanol or something like that. And it likes to be in water. They're hard to separate. And so this membrane allowed us to separate these two things without using a distillation column. If you ever seen like an ethanol fuel plant, they have distillation columns. They're like 40 feet tall. They have to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week because they're hot systems. They're not very efficient. And so this membrane was kind of part of the technology stack that I knew would allow me to do this thing cheaply. And it's really important that when we do it out in the solar field, that we're not running 24/7. We only run when the sun is shining. And so you have to shut down at night. And so you can't have like a distillation column, for example. That's one of the reasons it was important to have.
When you say distillation column, my mind immediately goes to some moonshine still in the woods, right? I mean it's the same principle, right? You're heating a liquid, you're getting steam vapor on one end, and then the alcohol is actually condensing down into its own chamber. So that's the way you separate. But that takes a lot of heat energy to perform.
It does,
that.
Yeah. So we don't want to do it that way. So yeah, if you look at like a still, then you've got fermentation mash. You've got a beer down there, and it's got some percentage of ethanol, which is what you want. And so you use the difference in their boiling points. And so you just put a bunch of wood or whatever underneath it, and if you're out in the woods, which you probably shouldn't be doing it out there. But then what comes out of the top is enriched in ethanol, which has it wants to be more of a gas than water does. So this is a membrane that can do that job without using all that energy. And in fact, one of the things we talked about is like, well, wait a minute, we just made ourselves like a membrane still. Is that something we're going to be allowed to do? Right? Because I can capture CO2 and I can turn it into whiskey, and with a membrane and like an electrochemical stack. And so we thought maybe let's not go down that road. Let's focus on making fuels instead.
I don't know, man. That could be more lucrative.
Yeah, I can make whiskey from thin air. I think that might be more popular.
So the membrane, is it working simply? Is it like a sieve where it's based on the molecule size, or is there a pressure gradient factor here too? I mean,
so the way it works is it's not based on size, because water and like say ethanol, if that's what you want to make, they're really similar in size. But what it's based on is the fact that the inside of the nanotube is like graphene. It's like if you ever seen what graphene is, it's like a pure carbon compound. If you put water on it, it'll be like a soccer ball. Like the water doesn't want anything to do with it.
It's hydrophobic.
Hydrophobic. That's right. But the fuel will have some part of it which has like what you call a methyl group, which is just like carbon and hydrogen, and it does like it. It like wants to stick to it a little bit, and that difference will cause the nanotube to fill up with the fuel, and it'll block the water. And so then, yeah, you have a little pressure difference to make things go through, but that's the principle. And so in a couple of our technical pathways, when we want to make like a mixture of alcohols, or we want to make ethanol or something like that, and we don't want to have any downstream steps, then the membrane is really important because it allows us to skip distillation. It allows us to save a lot of money and allows us to have an electricity only process for separating. But for the pure methanol we're making now, we're not using the Maxwell core so much; it's not necessary. Kind of just in the weeds that this is two different applications, but it's really useful when you to make, like we can make octanol and turn that into octane, and it's really useful for that.
Okay. All right. So the Maxwell core, though, and the membrane, they're actually fairly late in your whole process, are they not? Because first you have to create the basic building block of the fuel, and then you have to separate the water from the alcohol. So like, what's the first step in the process? The air comes into the cooling tower, right? And you, and then there's a chemical reaction, right, with soda ash or something.
So what we do is we have water with a high pH, and so one way you could do that is you start out, if you're starting from scratch, you'd have like potassium hydroxide,
Alkaline.
Yeah, it's alkaline. The pH is high, and so CO2 is an acid, right? So it wants to turn into bicarbonate in water. So if we just have a cooling tower kind of structure with a fan on top pulling air through, and you have like a little spray nozzle, and you have the water coming down on like the cooling tower packing, then the CO2 just like sucks into it, turns into bicarbonate. And so now you have potassium bicarbonate. And so that isn't going anywhere. That it wants to be there. And thermodynamically, that whole process was downstream. Like you didn't have to put any energy into that. The CO2 wants to go there. And so now you've got salty water, but the salt has carbon in it. It's potassium carbonate or bicarbonate. And our innovation is that we could do that and go straight into an electrochemical stack and turn that bicarbonate directly into fuel.
Okay, and so that's where the electrolysis comes in, right?
That's right. So that's where we put electricity into a catalyst. And what it does is it turns the water and the bicarbonate into whatever kind of fuel we want to make. And this is where we can go into different pathways because different kinds of fuel, right? And so if we want to make just a pure methanol, then we can turn it into something called a syngas, which is a mixture of carbon monoxide and hydrogen. If we want to go and make whiskey, we just turn it into ethanol. If we want to go and make like something that's going to turn into jet fuel, we might turn it into octanol and later turn that into like, octane, which is a pretty good jet fuel. Everything from the direct capture up to the electrochemical stack is the same, but then downstream you can go into different branching paths depending on what kind of fuel you want to make. And some of those use the Maxwell core and some don't.
Okay, so now you used a word, catalyze or catalyst, and I just so people understand, a catalyst is a substance that increases the rate of a chemical reaction without being consumed by the reaction itself. So, it's basically something that helps the reaction along. It facilitates the chemical process you're trying to accomplish. Is that fair to say? Okay.
That's right. And so we had to innovate on the catalyst too. And so this is something that is inside your electrochemical stack. So an electrochemical stack kind of looks like a battery. It has cathodes and anodes and separators. It can also look like a fuel cell or like a hydrogen electrolyzer. These are just ways that people put positive and negative electrodes in like a large number. And so what happens is you have the bicarbonate and the water coming in, and the catalyst we've engineered so that it makes it extremely likely that we're going to get the product we want versus what we don't want.
Okay, so for car guys, I'm going to make an analogy, and I hope this is a correct analogy, but people will understand this. When you've got a classic car, inevitably you've got parts that need to be plated, and plating is very expensive. And they make these home plating kits, and basically it's a chemical bath. You put the parts in, and then you have a cathode and an anode. And then you have whatever metal you want to plate it with, and you stick that in there. The reaction happens, and then those molecules of that plating metal adhere to your part, and you what comes out the other end is like a nickel-plated door handle or whatever.
That's right.
So that's kind of the same process, right? Just on a grander scale.
It's electrochemistry. It's the same thing. What you're doing is you're you're donating electrons to that and forming a different version of it on the handle. Exactly right.
And the reason I'm sort of dumbing this down, my audience is smart, okay, but I'm not. They're smarter than I am, but the reason I'm doing this is it has to be relatable, and I want people to really grasp what's going on here. This isn't alchemy. It's not magic. It's scientific principles that you're applying, and well-known scientific principles that we use every day.
Yeah, actually, since we started, labs all over the world started to replicate our work and to show how well it works and why it's so cheap.
All right, one more high school chemistry and science point I have to make. The law of conservation of energy says that one of the principles of the law of conservation of energy is that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, but it instead is transformed. It's transferred from one form to another. So the example would be the potential energy in a gallon of gas. When that finds an ignition source, that energy, that potential energy becomes kinetic energy and it burns.
That's right.
So how does the law of conservation energy factor into the Prometheus fuel plant?
It's the same way as you just described. So you described combustion, right? So you got a certain amount of energy in your fuel. For those who want to know, the gasoline is about 36 kilowatt hours per gallon. And so depending on how efficient your engine is, let's say you have like a Formula One engine, that's like 50% efficient, right? So then half of that's going to go into power for the powertrain, and the rest is going to turn to heat. And not just heat, but also the expansion of the exhaust gases a little bit. So that's what we call entropy. That is what the world just expands, right? And so what we have to do to make it back into fuel again is we have to capture all those parts, the CO2 and the water vapor, and we put the energy in, and then it turns back into fuel. But we take the thing which is big and expansive, we shrink it down into the molecules, and it takes energy to do that. And as a part of putting the energy into doing that, you also release heat again. So you actually get a release of heat in both directions. When you burn fuel, you put turning power to the wheels, you make excess heat. And then we turn the air and electricity back into fuel, you also make excess heat. And so you have to cool both things, the engine and our stack.
All right, very good.
No free lunch.
No free lunch. Rob, what's been the most challenging or most difficult obstacle along the way for you?
So there's lots of problems in a startup. Everything's hard. But I would say that it's also fun. It's exciting. Like when I was driving down the beach in that Mustang and on my fuel yesterday, I felt like it was all worth it. But the hard things have been when you're trying to design something no one has ever done before, no one's ever built before, you don't know exactly how you're supposed to build it. And sometimes we have computers that can help us to model things, right? So if anyone's made a mechanical part, sometimes you can use a simulation to tell you how it's going to handle stress, right? You want to make a strut or something like that. But when we tried to model what was going on inside these stacks, it's just way too complicated. And so what we ended up having to do is just kind of brute force it. And so in a single year, we might build and tear down 80 stacks. It gives you an idea how long it takes. It's a little bit like building an engine, racing around the track a couple of times, and then tearing it apart and looking at it, right? And so that just took a couple of years. And during that time, it doesn't feel like you're making a ton of progress. You're writing down all the observations. Like, okay, this thing broke, this thing corroded, this thing seemed like it worked okay. I really like this one. Why did this one work so well? And nobody knows. Let's build it again, right? And the thing you have to do is you got to have endurance. And we did. We stuck it out, and it really paid off because we ended up with this really great design that's informed by both theory and this like brute force practice. And people actually call that the Edisonian approach. Like we try like 10,000 filaments, and like, well, one of these is going to not burn.
Man, you took the thought right out of my head. I was sitting here thinking Thomas Edison tried
thousands.
Yeah, like thousands of different materials as a light bulb filament before he hit on the right one.
And he's like, I know one of these is going to work, one of these is going to do the job, but you don't know which one. At the time, they didn't have the kind of, even now it's hard to model that kind of thing.
Right. And something you said earlier about timing, the internal combustion engine wasn't possible really until the metallurgy technology caught up to the theory.
There's always an interplay between what a mechanic can do and what a mechanical engineer can design, right? And so a classic example is actually the steam engine. When when Watt was trying to improve, because he didn't create the first steam engine, right? There was one before that called the Newcomen that people had for like 70 years. He was actually working on one in a museum. But he finally got a breakthrough when he could find a machinist that could make a good cylinder, right? When he could finally get a good hole that was like the right, the circumference and even that you could actually get a seal so you could separate out the condenser from sort of the hot parts of the system. That's where he got all the efficiency. And so there's always this interplay, there's always this relationship between the people who are sort of theoretical and the people who can actually build stuff. You need both.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right. So you said that you've gone through like hundreds of stacks. How big a device are we talking about, at least on the research level?
So we almost never did any kind of small stacks. Like everybody, by the time we started, everybody had been using stacks that were like this big, like a stack of cards, like playing cards.
Like a stack of cards. Okay.
We didn't want to do that because there have been years of people showing you could turn CO2 into fuels doing that. So we went out and the very first one we built was like 2 square meters big, right? It was like 10, 20 square feet of area. And we're like, let's just see how big we can build it and see what it does. I mean, it really was that kind of like, let's just go do it and see what it does kind of thing. And then we have a graveyard of these stacks where some are like big and wide and some are tall and skinny and some are short and like, well, that one made the wrong thing. That one made the wrong thing. That one leaked on the ground all the time. That one corroded itself to death, but every one of them taught us something.
Sure.
It's brutal.
Yeah. The materials that you use, like they've got to be right on. They've got to be, because there's we're talking about chemical reactions. You want a material that's non-reactive.
Yeah, so we ended up using just a plastic material that doesn't react with water or alcohols or any of the fuels we make. But we use metal electrodes, which is really important because they're super durable. They need to last for like 20, 30, 40 years. But actually, the first tool I bought was a water jet cutter. You've used one of those before or seen one, right? They're awesome. Yeah, just high pressure water. You can cut through an I-beam, and we have. And so what we did is we made all of our stacks initially out of just cut aluminum, stainless steel, silicone gaskets. We cut everything on that thing. And we got a big one. It's like an 8 by 12 foot water jet cutter. And so we just started making stacks out of that. And so those don't have great tolerances like you're talking about, right? Because the silicone gaskets would compress a lot. But as we evolved, we got to the point where we made things that were machined plastic and then injection molded plastic, and they can have tolerances like 5 mil, right, 5,000ths of an inch plus or minus, and that's good enough. But you're right; it's like if you change the dimensions of something, which you can change by tightening the bolts, or change by the design, or change by what goes in between things, you can actually change products. What we're doing is, you're right; it's not magic; it's just chemistry, but it is some cutting edge stuff. We really are just able to make fuel molecules out of what feels like nothing because you don't see the air. Of course, carbon's a real thing in it, but it's just air.
The panel beaters and metal fabricators listening to this really are identifying with you right now because, yeah, it's important, and it takes precision.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you went through a lot of research and development. Would you say that this is ready for commercial application, or
yeah,
it is? Okay,
it is. Yeah, we already have a commercial scale prototype that's making like we only designed it to make a couple of gallons a week at most, but that's enough to do demonstrations, which is the kind of the point. And we've actually already sold out our first 2 commercial projects. So these commercial projects, we sold them out for 10 years. We're not announcing the customers yet because we want to kind of wait for better timing. And we got to coordinate with everybody, but essentially we're going to do a 100,000 ton per year project and a 1 million ton per year project, and they're already sold. And so we're ready to go out and start building those. And we're going to start building these. Go in 40-foot containers. Inside that is the electrochemical stacks, and then we have these direct air capture towers. And you just put them out in the desert where the solar is. You don't need to be grid connected. We don't want to connect to the grid, and you just start making fuel out in the middle of nowhere. So we're going to start doing that. Everything we have now is full size, but it's not in the container yet. So we're going to put it in the container. And then we're going to create a facility that is for the communities that we love and want to love us back. Obviously, we think they do. The classic collector car communities, the racing car communities. So we're going to have something we call Mojave Station, which is going to be a few 100,000 gallons a year of fuel for people who race cars, people who collect cars, and gasoline for classics. And so we're going to make sure that as we're selling our methanol to big industrial companies around the world, we're also making fuel for people that really want and need them, and care about what we're doing.
Super cool. Now, the stack, the container, everybody can get an idea of what that, like 40 foot by 20 foot high, right? So,
Oh no, it's only 9 feet tall. Like it's a shipping
oh,
container. Yeah, it's like a standard
okay.
shipping container. Yeah.
No, but I mean so there's the container, but it isn't there also a tower?
Well, we're probably going to we show it as a tower, but like you would stand it up or something. But it probably is going to also be in a 40-foot container. It won't look quite as cool. We're
Okay.
still playing with the aesthetic design, right? What should it look like? But essentially, it's just a cooling tower kind of thing.
Okay. I mean, but you want it to sort of look pretty.
We're going to look pretty.
If
Yeah,
you,
I mean, people are
if
going to
you
drive
can.
by, like, what is that? Some kid's going to
Right.
look out the side of the car and going to be inspired by it. And they're going to make some sci-fi real next time.
Honestly, I'm picturing some sort of Sid Mead creation, if you know who that was.
No, that's not ringing a bell.
Sid Mead was the guy who designed the Blade Runner cars, and he
Oh, okay,
designed,
yeah.
yeah,
We
very
definitely
futuristic.
go for like an aggressive look, like retro futurist, like that kind of thing is definitely our look.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool old architecture with a big cantilever roof and colorful designs, stuff like that. We're definitely going to do that. But yeah, we are ready to go. We are going to start production, and we're doing demos now. So we're making enough fuel to put into motorcycles, put into our Mustang, and put into racing cars.
Okay. Now we talked about the stack, the cooling tower. We
Mm-hmm.
get an idea of how big that is, but what about the solar farm? Because they have to go together.
Yeah.
So how big a solar farm are we talking about?
So it depends on how much fuel you want to make. So for every megawatt of solar, you need about 5 acres, right? So for a very, very large commercial installation, you might have a couple 100,000 acres of solar, but they're just going to look like every utility scale solar plant does now. So there's nothing kind of special about the solar plant. If you look at like the big solar installations that are taking place all over the world, the ones that are like a gigawatt, they're just going to look like that. It's just that next to those will be this small group of little white boxes that just turn all that solar into liquid fuel.
And so your grand vision for this, I mean, I'm thinking about, because you talked about the desert.
Mm-hmm.
I at first, when I began researching this, my concept was, oh well, this is basically just gas stations, but making fuel, not simply pumping fuel. But is that sort of the business model? Like you just put one of these modules wherever, in Dubuque or in Tampa or in Denver, and or is there a central production facility and then you have to truck the fuels out? How does it work?
So the cheapest fuel is going to come from those central facilities, because what you want is to be where the solar is the best and the cheapest. So that means going to places that have very little land cost, right? You don't want to be someplace where someone would have like a residential neighborhood or an industrial facility or something, because they're going to be higher lease rates. You want to be out on like Bureau of Land Management land or ranch land or something like that. So places like that are going to be like in Southwest United States, maybe like northwestern Australia, Spain, places like that have really great sunshine. You also could do it in places that have wind, right? So you could do it like in Northern Europe where they have like offshore wind. You could do that, and you could have hydropower. You could use nuclear. You could use any kind of electricity you want. But I just think that solar right now just has the cost advantage, just like hands down. 1 cent per kilowatt hour and dropping is really, really cheap, whereas wind is still like 3 cents.
Right. And then at point of sale, what's your vision there? I mean, are you collaborating with companies like ExxonMobil? I mean, is that even practical or realistic?
You certainly could. I mean, we haven't announced any partnerships yet, but I mean, the people have invested in gas station chains. We wouldn't necessarily want to go buy our own gas stations. The first goal is to get these commercial plants built and build as many of them as we can, as fast as we can. And so some of our first customers are going to be people who maybe, airlines or shipping companies, or people who have fleets of trucks, people who want to turn methanol into other things. But at some point, we're going to go into retail, and we probably will do that with partners to some degree, because there are a lot of gas stations. Like if you just look at the United States, and it's really important where they are. People will go to the one that's closest to them. Maybe they'll go across the street for say 5 cents or something, but it's a pretty local activity. And so I can't really say to that. I would like to have our own brand on it. I would like it to be Prometheus Fuel. I think that's important.
Well, that was the other question I was going to ask is would it be a branded fuel? I mean, I suppose potentially you could sell to a company like ExxonMobil and they could make a blend, right? And no one would ever know that there's Prometheus in their tank.
Well, we'd probably have we'd want people to know. If we were to sell with somebody else, we'd put our brand on it. We want people to know the quality that we make. It's extremely clean, burns clean, high power. We can tune it. We plan on actually producing different grades as we go forward, that all of them getting cheaper. But if you want to emphasize having super high octane, if you want to have like super low emissions, you want to, of course, all of it carbon neutral. And we think it's important that the people know that they're getting that.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I would want my name on it too. I mean, it's something to be proud of, and I mean, I know that it's still early days, right? There's a long road ahead of you, but I love disruptors in the marketplace, and you certainly fit that bill.
Yeah, thank you. We're definitely disrupting something. I mean, this is a big thing. This is a global $2 trillion industry.
And you're envisioning like 500,000 of these Prometheus fuel plants by the middle of the century, maybe sooner?
Well, we think we can mass produce these the same way you do cars, right? So if you were to make a factory to make cars, typically one of those will make about 500,000 units a year. And so we think we could probably produce about the similar quantity, about 500,000 units a year. And to make 1 million tons per year of methanol, which is like 332 million gallons a year of methanol, you'd only need like 8,000 of these. So you could make a lot of fuel really fast with this single factory. So we're going to go as quickly as we can. We think that because our fuels cost the same or less as the commodity fuels, there's no limit to how fast we can go other than just our ability to get solar in the ground.
Okay, so that was my next question is what's the price point at the pump?
So we're targeting getting down to like $2 a gallon, but starting out, it'll probably be something more like $3.50. For these first projects, we're selling methanol, and the methanol sells by the ton. It's a commodity product. And the long-term average contract price in North America right now is about $600 a ton, and our cost of production is less than $500. So we actually can just go out and undercut the commodity price starting out. And that's gonna have some speed if we do it right.
And now I'm not going to do the math in my head because we're talking about tons and millions, but like that gives you a pretty good margin.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the margins are great. I mean, you're printing fuel from there, but you're also pretty much printing money. I mean, it's no doubt it's a good business.
And it sounds like the plant process is relatively passive. I mean, certainly there's maintenance and
Mm-hmm.
but for the most part, it's kind of you maybe have a skeleton crew of humans that would maintain the plants, and
They run on software, so you have a satellite connection and you monitor them, and you have like a regional center that will go and like swap out failed parts and stuff like that. So you will have like a team of people that goes and maintains them, but they're designed to run for decades.
wow.
Yeah, it's a really, really cool technology.
Okay, Rob. So this all sounds awesome, but I have to share with you that I read this article in MIT Technology Review. I know you know the article I'm talking about. And I have to say, it could not have been more slanted in opposition to what you're doing. The language that the author used was loaded. It described your demonstration of the technology as theatrical. I mean, he cherry-picked academics who kind of dismissed this whole venture as laughable or not commercially viable. One of the guys quoted was a solar proponent, I think an investor, and he said you were out over your skis a little bit. I mean, imagine somebody saying, well, Edison, he's kind of out over his skis a little bit. It's sort of silly to, I mean, I understand people ought to be skeptical and they ought to be, they ought to have critical thinking about this. But the article was over the top. They clearly had an agenda, and so what do you say to all that?
Yeah, they weren't out to be our friends. That was pretty much like a takedown piece. They were trying to see if they could take us down, and I agree it was pretty biased. Some of the academics they interviewed, they didn't mention the fact that they were founders of competitors. So they interviewed a guy at Harvard who was a founder of one of our competitors, but they didn't identify him as that in the quote. They kind of presented him as objective. I think it was a response to the fact that we went out and we raised a really big round and a big valuation. So we went from launching out of an incubator to getting like a over $1 billion valuation in less than 3 years with like a dozen people. And that I think that caused a lot of concern in our competitors who hadn't gotten to that kind of valuation. And um, you know, there are always haters. I think that article, at the end of that article, I said, hey, we're either going to ship or we're not. And here we are shipping. So I feel like it's kind of dustbin of history.
And you've got some corporate investment, right? Like I think BMW is one of your.
That's right. Yeah. So BMW was our A-round investor, and a big global shipping company, Maersk. They invested in our Series B. That's right. So they have produced a bunch of ships that use methanol fuel. So we hope that they'll be customers of ours in the future. We've also made a deal to supply jet fuel to American Airlines. So yeah, we've been really well received. We've had a lot of people who are our friends. The MIT Tech people were not our friends, but that's okay. Everybody trying to do something new. Edison also had articles like that written about him. Everybody does.
Yeah, it's funny. You just you have to keep that perspective, and I suspect the answer is no. But do you have any particular fears about the future of Prometheus? I mean, obstacles, things that could obstruct you. I mean, government regulation, agendas from other, portions of the marketplace. Does any of that give you pause?
People asked me this question in like 2019 when we were just starting. And I said, the only thing I can imagine that would really bother me is if there was a major global financial collapse and oil went negative. And that actually happened the following year.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're still
COVID,
here.
Right?
COVID, and oil actually went negative for the first time. People were paying people to take it away because they couldn't store it anywhere. It's this massive dislocation. There are lots of things that can go wrong. It's a heavily regulated industry. There's a lot of money at stake. It has a long history of people pretty sharp elbows playing hardball. But I think what we're doing is exciting to people. I think what we're doing is revolutionary. I think that the low price wins. So I'm more optimistic than worried. There's lots of things to worry about, but there's also lots of things to be excited about.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad you're looking at racing and motorsport as a place to showcase what you're doing. I think that's like ideal. That's going to get people excited.
It's fun.
Well, yeah, because to see the highest performance machines out there running on your fuel, I mean, that speaks for itself.
Absolutely. Oh, and that reminds me, I want to shout out, the Mustang we're running, like that extra 60 horsepower. We had some friends that helped us to do that. And I want to give a shout out to Levine Restorations and Brenspeed. They modified the car, and as far as I or they know, it's the only 68 Mustang that can run on racing methanol, at least in North America, if not the world. And so those guys did an amazing job, and I just want to shout out for them.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, what kind of fuel economy are you getting out of it?
So methanol has about half the energy density of gasoline. So you'd expect, in a Mustang of that kind, I think you're getting about, 18 to 20 miles per gallon normally. So you get about half that on the methanol, but you get there faster.
Yeah, you do. Another question just occurred to me. Is commercial aviation, have they expressed interest in all of this?
Absolutely. We announced the sale of jet fuel to American Airlines a few years ago, and we intend to fulfill that. So the great thing is that we can make jet fuel in like one of two ways, but the one we're going to do first is to turn the methanol into jet. And so methanol could turn into jet fuel, diesel, and gasoline. And what's great about those is that, especially for diesel and gasoline, is that you don't need any new regulations. So in other words, that's a way of creating those products that is already like approved. You can go out on the road, you can sell it retail, you can drive it. Jet fuel is almost there. Methanol to jet is almost there. And so that'll be like a drop-in replacement. And we aim to drive the price of that down as well.
And jet fuel is, it's sort of like diesel fuel.
Yeah, that's right. So diesel, jet fuel, and rocket fuel are all kind of in that kerosene range. Famously, diesel, if you have to hold a light on it to keep it burning, right? One of the reasons that Rudolf Diesel developed it is it's safer. And that's why it was important in the submarines and things like that. Whereas gasoline is extremely volatile, like just a little spark.
Yeah. Interesting. Wow. I still have a million questions, but I think, you've really given us a good look at what Prometheus is doing and the potential. And it's exciting for guys like me and folks in my audience who, we don't want to see our internal combustion cars go the way of the horse and buggy. I mean, we want to continue to enjoy them, and there's no reason we shouldn't. I mean,
Agreed.
I'll just editorialize a little bit, which is I think the death of the internal combustion engine has been greatly exaggerated, and there's been no small measure of political agenda behind that, but also just a lot of folks who see new lines of business in EVs and green sources of energy. And I think they're less altruistic than they are profit motivated. I'll just say that. But there's a place for the internal combustion engine. And I think there'll continue to be one for many years to come. So Rob, I wish you luck.
Thank you.
Please stay in touch and keep me posted on your progress. And if I'm up in Santa Cruz at any point, I'd sure love to come by and check it out.
You should come go for a ride.
Take me for a ride in the Mustang, man.
Absolutely. Go down the beach.
All right. Rob McGinnis, CEO of Prometheus Fuels. He's the CEO and founder, in fact, and you can find out more on their website, which is prometheusfuels.com. I'll have links in the show notes, as always. Rob, thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you. It was great.
That's all for this episode of Horsepower Heritage. Go to buymeacoffee.com/HP Heritage and become a patron. I'll see you back here on Wednesday, April 30th for more of the people and stories behind the machines. So until then, I'm Maurice Merrick. Thanks for listening.